Attention! This is a journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Charleston history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts reach and at what moments of the day or night. In 1841, the city of Charleston stood as a testament to Southern prosperity, its cobblestone streets echoing with the footsteps of merchants and the distant sound of ships arriving at the harbor. The grand mansions of the wealthy lined the Battery, their white columns gleaming in the Carolina sun, while behind closed doors a system of human bondage maintained the delicate fabric of society. It was in this world of contrasts that the Carter Mansion rose like a monument to accumulated wealth, its 3 stories casting long shadows over Meeting Street. The house itself had been built in 1798 by Ezekiel Carter, a rice plantation owner whose fortune had grown with each passing season. By 1841, his son Nathaniel had inherited not only the mansion, but also the burden of maintaining appearances in a society where reputation meant everything. The Carter family occupied the upper floors, while the basement and servants' quarters housed those who made their comfortable existence possible. Among the enslaved individuals who worked within the mansion's walls was a boy known only as Jacob. Records from the Charleston County Registry Office, discovered during a routine archival review in 1963, indicate that Jacob was approximately 18 years of age, though exact birth records for enslaved individuals were rarely maintained with precision. What distinguished Jacob from others in the household was his unusual skill with carpentry and masonry, talents that had made him invaluable to the Carter family during their frequent renovations of the aging mansion. The winter of 1841 proved particularly harsh for Charleston, with temperatures dropping to levels rarely seen in the coastal city. Ships remained docked for weeks, their cargo frozen in place while the wealthy families retreated deeper into their heated homes. It was during this time that Nathaniel Carter decided to undertake a significant renovation of the mansion's east wing, a project that would require the construction of new walls and the modification of existing room layouts. Jacob had been assigned to work on the project under the supervision of Thomas Mitchell, a white carpenter who had been contracted for the more complex aspects of the renovation. Mitchell's daily reports, preserved in a leather-bound ledger found in the Charleston Historical Society's archives in 1967, detail the progress of the work with methodical precision. Each entry noted the materials used, the sections completed, and the workers present on any given day. The entries for the first 2 weeks of February 1841 follow a predictable pattern, documenting steady progress on the East Wing's interior walls. However, the entry for February 15th contains an unusual notation. Work delayed due to absence of Negro boy Jacob. Assumed illness. The following day's entry reads simply, continued without assistance. Wall completion delayed. B. What makes these entries particularly significant is not what they contain, but what they fail to address. No subsequent entries mention Jacob's return to work, nor do they reference any explanation for his continued absence. In a household where every tool and every hour of labor was meticulously accounted for, the sudden disappearance of a skilled worker should have warranted more than a passing notation. The Carter family's personal correspondence from this period, donated to the South Carolina Historical Society in 1959 by a descendant, provides additional context. A letter dated February 20th, 1841, from Nathaniel Carter to his brother William in Savannah, mentions the completion of the East Wing renovation ahead of schedule. The letter's tone suggests satisfaction with the outcome, describing the new walls as solid as the foundation itself, and noting that the work had been accomplished with fewer hands than anticipated. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came the social season that defined Charleston's elite society. The Carter Mansion hosted several gatherings during March and April of 1841, events that were documented in the Charleston Courier's society pages. These newspaper accounts, preserved on microfilm at the Charleston County Public Library, describe elaborate dinner parties and musical evenings, all taking place in the newly renovated East Wing of the mansion. Guests consistently praised the mansion's updated interior, particularly noting the excellent acoustics in the East Wing's main parlor. Several accounts mention the unusual silence that seemed to pervade the renovated rooms, a quality that enhanced conversation and musical performances. What none of these guests could have known was that the walls they admired had been constructed with a precision born of necessity, their thickness carefully calculated to ensure complete sound isolation. As the months passed, other enslaved individuals in the Carter household began to whisper among themselves about Jacob's disappearance. These conversations, while never recorded in official documents, were later recounted by former enslaved individuals during interviews conducted by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s. Sarah Williams, who had worked as a house servant in the Carter Mansion during the 1840s, provided a particularly detailed account to WPA interviewer Margaret Thompson in 1936. According to Williams, who was 94 years old at the time of her interview, Jacob had been a quiet boy who kept to himself but was always kind to the younger children. She recalled that his absence was initially explained as a transfer to one of the Carter family's rural properties, a common practice when household needs changed. However, Williams noted that such transfers typically involved some form of farewell or acknowledgement, neither of which occurred in Jacob's case. The most unsettling aspect of Williams' testimony concerns the sounds that began to emanate from the East Wing shortly after the renovation's completion. She described hearing what seemed like scratching or tapping sounds coming from within the walls, particularly during the quiet hours of early morning. When she mentioned these sounds to other household members, she was told they were likely caused by settling wood or small animals that had found their way into the wall spaces. These explanations might have been accepted indefinitely had it not been for a discovery made in 1865. Following the Union Army's occupation of Charleston, the Carter family had fled the city as federal forces approached, leaving their mansion to serve as temporary headquarters for occupying officers. During this period, several modifications were made to accommodate military needs, including the installation of telegraph equipment in the East Wing. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, commander of the garrison stationed in the mansion, recorded in his official reports that workers installing telegraph lines had discovered an irregularity in the wall construction of the east parlor. When the plaster was removed to investigate, workers found what Webb described as a sealed chamber approximately 4 feet in height, 3 feet in width, and 7 feet in length. The chamber's contents, as documented in Webb's report filed with the War Department, consisted of human remains in an advanced state of decomposition, along with several personal items. Among these items were fragments of coarse cloth, consistent with slave clothing, a small wooden cross carved from pine, and what appeared to be scratch marks covering the interior surfaces of the chamber. The positioning of the remains suggested that the individual had been placed in the chamber while still alive, as evidenced by the desperate claw marks found on all surfaces within reach. Webb's report also noted the discovery of what he termed a crude calendar system, scratched into the wooden framework of the chamber. These markings, consisting of grouped tally marks, suggested that the imprisoned individual had attempted to track the passage of time during their confinement. The total number of marks, when translated into days, indicated a survival period of approximately 2 weeks within the sealed space. The military's investigation into this discovery was necessarily limited by the ongoing chaos of occupation and reconstruction. Webb's superior officers determined that the remains should be given a proper burial in the Potter's Field section of Magnolia Cemetery, where many unknown individuals had been interred over the years. The chamber itself was sealed with brick and mortar, and the telegraph equipment was installed in an adjacent room. No formal charges were filed in connection with this discovery, as the Carter family had already fled Charleston and their whereabouts were unknown. Moreover, the legal system of 1865 was ill-equipped to pursue justice for crimes committed against enslaved individuals during the antebellum period. The case was classified as a historical curiosity rather than an active investigation. The Carter mansion remained under military control until 1867, when it was sold to settle the family's outstanding debts. The new owners, the Morrison family, were unaware of the chamber's existence and the tragic history hidden within their new home's walls. They proceeded to live in the mansion for the next 3 decades, during which time no unusual incidents were reported. It was not until 1898, exactly 100 years after the mansion's original construction, that the story of the sealed chamber began to emerge from the shadows of history. Dr. Helena Bradshaw, a researcher with the newly formed Charleston Historical Preservation Society, had been commissioned to document the architectural features of significant antebellum homes. Her work on the Carter Mansion led her to examine various historical documents, including the military reports filed during the Union occupation. Bradshaw's initial interest was purely architectural, as she sought to understand how the mansion's east wing had been modified over the decades. However, her discovery of Lieutenant Colonel Webb's report in the National Archives prompted a deeper investigation into the mansion's history. She began cross-referencing military records with contemporary newspaper accounts, personal correspondence, and property records to piece together a more complete picture of what had transpired. Her research revealed disturbing patterns in the Carter family's treatment of their enslaved workforce. Multiple documents suggested that Nathaniel Carter had a reputation for harsh disciplinary measures, though such practices were rarely documented in detail due to their legal acceptance at the time. Bradshaw found several references in neighboring families' correspondence to incidents at the Carter mansion that had resulted in the disappearance of enslaved individuals, though specific details were typically omitted from written records. Perhaps most significantly, Bradshaw discovered a letter written by Dr. James Morrison, the physician who had attended the Carter family during the 1840s. In this letter, dated April 1842, and addressed to a colleague in Philadelphia, Morrison mentioned treating Nathaniel Carter for what he described as severe nervous distress following the renovation of his home's east wing. Morrison noted that Carter appeared to be suffering from insomnia and what would today be recognized as symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Morrison's letter also contained a cryptic reference to Carter's confession during a particularly severe episode of anxiety. According to the physician, Carter had spoken of the sound of fingernails on wood and expressed fear that the dead do not rest easy when justice is denied. While Morrison attributed these statements to his patient's disturbed mental state, Bradshaw recognized them as potential confirmation of the sealed chamber's true purpose. The most damning evidence emerged from Bradshaw's examination of the contractor's ledger, maintained by Thomas Mitchell. Hidden within the routine entries documenting the renovation's progress were several pages that had been torn out, leaving only small fragments of text visible along the binding. Using a magnifying glass and careful lighting, Bradshaw was able to decipher portions of these fragments, which contained references to sealed work and special construction requirements. One partially legible entry appeared to read, "Sealed as requested. No air passage. Work completed in silence. Another fragment mentioned payment received for discretion and what seemed to be instructions for maintaining secrecy regarding the project's true scope. These entries suggested that Mitchell had been complicit in the construction of the sealed chamber, likely in exchange for additional compensation and assurances of continued employment. Bradshaw's research culminated in a formal report submitted to the Charleston Historical Preservation Society in 1901. Her findings prompted renewed interest in the Carter Mansion's history and led to calls for a more thorough investigation of the sealed chamber. However, the mansion's current owners, now the third family to occupy the property since 1867, were reluctant to authorize any destructive examination of their home's interior. If you're enjoying the story and feel like helping the channel with any amount, please support us by clicking the thanks button and donating whatever you wish. This really helps the channel keep posting new stories. The matter remained in limbo for several more decades, with various historical societies and academic institutions expressing interest in pursuing further investigation. It was not until 1936, when the mansion was designated as a historical landmark, that formal permission was granted for a limited archaeological examination of the East Wing's wall structure. The investigation, led by Dr. Robert Henley from the University of South Carolina's Archaeology Department, employed the most advanced techniques available at the time to examine the sealed chamber without causing significant damage to the surrounding structure. Using a combination of careful probing and minimal removal of interior wall materials, Henley's team was able to confirm the existence of the chamber and document its contents more thoroughly than had been possible during the 1865 discovery. Henley's team found additional evidence that painted an even more disturbing picture of Jacob's final weeks. The scratch marks on the chamber's interior surfaces formed distinct patterns that suggested systematic attempts to find weaknesses in the construction. Some markings appeared to spell out letters or words, though the poor preservation of the wood made definitive translation impossible. Most heartbreaking were the small piles of wood shavings found in the chamber's corners, evidence of Jacob's desperate attempts to create an opening large enough to escape. The team also discovered what appeared to be a makeshift calendar system, far more sophisticated than had been initially reported by Lieutenant Colonel Webb. The markings suggested not only an attempt to track days, but also to record the passage of hours within each day. The precision of these markings indicated that Jacob had maintained his sanity and hope for an extended period, continuing to believe that rescue might be possible until the very end. Among the personal items recovered were fragments of a small wooden figure carved with the same skill that had made Jacob valuable as a carpenter. The figure appeared to represent a human form with arms raised skyward, possibly in prayer or supplication. This discovery provided a glimpse into Jacob's spiritual life and suggested that he had found some measure of comfort in his faith during his ordeal. Dr. Henley's report, completed in 1937, included detailed photographs and measurements of the chamber and its contents. These documents were filed with the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, where they remained largely forgotten until a routine digitization project in 1963 brought them back to public attention. The report's publication in the Journal of Southern History sparked renewed interest in the case and prompted additional research into the broader patterns of violence against enslaved individuals in antebellum Charleston. This renewed attention led to the discovery of additional documentation that had previously been overlooked. In 1965, researchers at the Charleston County Library uncovered a collection of personal papers that had been donated by the Morrison family in the 1920s. Among these papers was a diary kept by Margaret Morrison, who had lived in the Carter Mansion from 1867 to 1895. Morrison's diary entries revealed that the family had experienced numerous unexplained phenomena during their residence in the mansion, particularly in the East Wing. She wrote of hearing tapping sounds within the walls, especially during winter months when the house was quiet. She also noted that several guests had complained of feeling uncomfortable in the East Wing's parlor, describing a sense of being watched or an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Most intriguingly, Morrison documented several instances when her young children claimed to hear someone calling for help from within the walls. These incidents, which occurred primarily during the 1870s, prompted the family to conduct limited investigations of the wall spaces accessible through the basement. However, they found no evidence of structural problems or animal infestations that might explain the sounds. Morrison's diary also revealed that the family had consulted with a medium in 1881, following a particularly intense period of unexplained noises. The medium, whose name was recorded only as Mrs. Caldwell, claimed to sense the presence of a tormented soul trapped within the house. According to Morrison's account, Mrs. Caldwell specifically mentioned sensing someone who had died in darkness and silence, unable to call for help or receive comfort in their final moments. While such spiritual consultations might be dismissed as products of Victorian-era superstition, Morrison's diary entries provide a valuable record of the ongoing impact of Jacob's death on subsequent inhabitants of the mansion. The consistent nature of the reported phenomena, spanning nearly 3 decades of the Morrison family's residence, suggests that the trauma associated with the sealed chamber had left lasting psychological impressions on the space. The diary entries cease abruptly in 1895, following the death of Margaret Morrison from pneumonia. Her surviving family members sold the mansion the following year and relocated to North Carolina. Subsequent owners reported few unusual incidents, though this may have been due to extensive renovations completed in the early 1900s that modified much of the mansion's interior structure. In 1968, exactly 100 years after the end of the Civil War, the Charleston Historical Preservation Society organized a memorial service for Jacob and other enslaved individuals who had suffered violent deaths in the city. The service, held at the Mother Emanuel AME Church, drew representatives from across the South and marked the first formal acknowledgement of Jacob's story by the broader Charleston community. The ceremony included the dedication of a small memorial plaque, now installed near the entrance to the Carter Mansion. The plaque's inscription reads simply, "In memory of Jacob, age 18, who died in this house February 1841. His story reminds us that silence can be complicity, and that justice delayed is justice denied." The plaque's installation was not without controversy, as some descendants of prominent Charleston families objected to what they viewed as an oversimplification of complex historical circumstances. Research into Jacob's story continued throughout the 1960s, with historians attempting to trace his origins and identify any surviving relatives. These efforts were largely unsuccessful, as records relating to enslaved individuals were notoriously incomplete and often destroyed during the chaos of the Civil War. However, researchers did uncover additional information about the Carter family's ultimate fate. Nathaniel Carter and his immediate family had fled Charleston in February 1865, initially seeking refuge with relatives in Georgia. From there, they traveled to Texas, where Nathaniel attempted to establish a new plantation using the limited resources they had managed to salvage. However, his mental health continued to deteriorate, and by 1868, family correspondence indicates that he was unable to function effectively as the head of household. A letter written by Carter's wife, Elizabeth, to her sister in Virginia provides insight into his condition during this period. She described her husband as being haunted by sounds that no one else can hear, and noted his tendency to wake in the night, claiming that someone was calling his name. Elizabeth also mentioned that Nathaniel had developed an intense fear of enclosed spaces and would become agitated when required to enter rooms with thick walls or limited ventilation. Nathaniel Carter died in 1871, reportedly from complications related to chronic insomnia and what his physician described as nervous exhaustion. His death certificate, filed with the Travis County Clerk's Office in Austin, Texas, listed the immediate cause of death as heart failure, though family correspondence suggests that his physical decline was precipitated by years of psychological distress. Elizabeth Carter lived until 1889, during which time she reportedly made several attempts to contact spiritual advisors who might help her understand her late husband's suffering. According to family records donated to the Texas State Historical Association, she became convinced that Nathaniel's psychological problems were connected to unfinished business from their time in Charleston. She died without ever learning the full details of Jacob's fate. The Carter family's plantation in Texas failed within a decade of Nathaniel's death, and the surviving family members dispersed across the country. None of them ever returned to Charleston, and their descendants remained largely unaware of the family's connection to Jacob's story until the 1960s, when renewed publicity surrounding the case prompted several individuals to come forward with additional family documents. Among these documents was a letter written by Nathaniel Carter in 1869, apparently intended for his brother William, but never sent. The letter, discovered in 1869 among Elizabeth Carter's papers by a descendant, contained what appeared to be a confession of sorts, though the language was oblique and filled with religious imagery. He mentioned feeling compelled to make amends for silence imposed upon the innocent, and expressed a desire to restore breath to those who were denied air. The letter also contained references to the boy who worked with wood, and a plea for divine forgiveness for walls built in haste and sealed in haste. While the letter's exact meaning remained open to interpretation, historians generally agreed that it represented Carter's attempt to acknowledge his role in Jacob's death without making an explicit admission that might have legal consequences for his surviving family. In the letter, Carter wrote of being pursued by the sound of industry and described dreams in which he found himself trapped within walls of his own construction. The document provided additional confirmation of the psychological toll that the crime had taken on its perpetrator, while also offering insight into the moral framework within which such acts were rationalized during the antebellum period. The final piece of evidence emerged in 1969, when renovation work at the Carter mansion uncovered a small wooden box hidden beneath floorboards in the basement. The box contained what appeared to be Jacob's personal effects: a small wooden cross, several hand-carved buttons, and a fragment of paper bearing what seemed to be a partial list of names. The names, written in a careful hand, included several that matched records of enslaved individuals who had worked in Charleston area households during the 1830s and 40s. The discovery of this box suggested that Jacob had maintained connections with a broader community of enslaved individuals, possibly including family members or friends from whom he had been separated. The list's existence implied a level of literacy that was remarkable for an enslaved person of that era, as most were deliberately denied access to education. This finding prompted additional research into underground networks that might have provided education and mutual support among Charleston's enslaved population. The box's location beneath the basement floorboards also suggested that Jacob had anticipated the possibility of danger and had taken steps to preserve some record of his existence and connections. The careful placement of his few possessions in a location where they might eventually be discovered represented a final act of hope that his story would someday be told. Dr. Henley's final report on the case, published posthumously in 1972, concluded that Jacob's death represented not an isolated incident of individual cruelty, but rather a systematic manifestation of the dehumanization inherent in the institution of slavery. The sealed chamber, he argued, was merely the most extreme example of the ways in which enslaved individuals were rendered invisible by a society that depended upon their labor while denying their humanity. The Carter Mansion continued to serve as a private residence until 1975, when it was purchased by a non-profit organization dedicated to preserving Charleston's architectural heritage. The organization's restoration efforts included careful documentation of the sealed chamber and the installation of educational exhibits that tell Jacob's story to visitors. The mansion now operates as a museum, with guided tours that explicitly address the building's connection to the horrors of slavery. The chamber itself remains sealed, in accordance with the wishes of several advocacy groups who argued that opening it would constitute a violation of Jacob's final resting place. Instead, visitors can view photographs and detailed measurements that document the chamber's contents and construction. A small window installed during the 1970s renovation allows visitors to peer into the space where Jacob spent his final weeks. Today, more than a century and a half after Jacob's death, his story serves as a reminder of the countless individuals whose lives were lost to the violence and cruelty of slavery. His name has been added to several memorial lists maintained by historical organizations throughout the South, ensuring that his memory will be preserved alongside those of other victims whose stories have been recovered through historical research. The scratch marks Jacob left on the chamber's wooden walls have been preserved as evidence of his desperate struggle for survival. Forensic analysis completed in the 1980s confirmed that these markings were made over an extended period, indicating that Jacob remained conscious and active for most of his time in confinement. The precision and organization of his makeshift calendar system suggested that he maintained hope for rescue until very near the end of his ordeal. Perhaps most poignantly, researchers determined that the chamber's location within the mansion's east wing would have allowed Jacob to hear the sounds of daily life continuing around him. The voices of family members, the footsteps of other enslaved individuals, and the normal activities of household routine would all have been audible through the walls that imprisoned him. This proximity to normalcy, while being unable to call for help or alert others to his predicament, added a psychological dimension to his suffering that extended far beyond physical deprivation. The story of Jacob's death resonated throughout the civil rights movement of the 1960s, serving as a powerful example of the institutional violence that had characterized American slavery. Civil rights leaders often referenced his case when arguing that the legacy of slavery continued to influence contemporary racial attitudes and that historical acknowledgement was essential for achieving true reconciliation. In 1968, the same year as the memorial service at Mother Emanuel AME Church, the Carter Mansion was designated as a site of historical significance by the South Carolina Historical Commission. This designation ensured that Jacob's story would be preserved and that future generations would have access to the documentation that had brought his fate to light. The Commission's report noted that the case represented one of the most thoroughly documented examples of individual violence against enslaved persons in the antebellum South. Educational programs developed around Jacob's story have been implemented in schools throughout the Charleston area and beyond. These programs use his experience to help students understand the human cost of slavery and to develop critical thinking skills about historical sources and interpretation. Teachers report that Jacob's story, because it is so thoroughly documented and because it focuses on an individual whose age approximated that of their students, provides a powerful tool for making abstract historical concepts more concrete and personally meaningful. The annual memorial service held each February 15th at the Carter Mansion has grown from a small gathering of local historians and activists to a significant regional event that draws participants from across the country. Speakers at these services have included prominent civil rights leaders, academic historians, and descendants of enslaved individuals who experienced similar fates. The service provides an opportunity for reflection on the progress that has been made in addressing historical injustices while acknowledging the work that remains to be done. In recent decades, genealogical research has identified several individuals who may be descended from Jacob's extended family. While direct lineage cannot be established due to the incomplete nature of historical records, DNA analysis has suggested connections between contemporary families and the broader community of enslaved individuals who lived and worked in the Charleston area during the 1840s. These potential connections have added personal dimensions to Jacob's story and have helped to humanize his experience for modern audiences. The preservation of Jacob's memory has also contributed to broader efforts to document and commemorate the experiences of enslaved individuals throughout the American South. His story has been included in several major databases maintained by universities and historical organizations, ensuring that researchers studying slavery and its aftermath will have access to detailed information about his case. These resources have facilitated comparative studies that examine patterns of violence and resistance within slave-holding societies. Contemporary visitors to the Carter Mansion often report being moved by the physical presence of the sealed chamber and the tangible evidence of Jacob's suffering. The scratch marks on the wooden walls, the careful tally marks that tracked his dwindling days, and the small personal items recovered from his makeshift grave provide a direct connection to his experience that transcends the limitations of written documentation. Many visitors comment that seeing these physical traces of his ordeal makes the abstract concept of slavery's cruelty suddenly and powerfully real. The ongoing preservation of Jacob's story also serves as a testament to the importance of historical investigation and documentation. Without the careful research conducted by historians like Dr. Bradshaw and Dr. Henley, his fate might have remained hidden forever within the mansion's walls. Their work demonstrated that even the most deliberately concealed crimes could be brought to light through persistent investigation and careful analysis of available evidence. As Charleston continues to grapple with its complex history and the ongoing legacy of slavery, Jacob's story provides a focal point for discussions about memory, justice, and reconciliation. Community leaders have used his case to initiate conversations about how historical trauma continues to influence contemporary society and what responsibilities current generations bear for addressing past injustices. These discussions often prove challenging and sometimes controversial, but they represent essential steps toward achieving a more complete understanding of the city's past. The establishment of the Jacob Memorial Fund in 1976 has provided resources for ongoing research into the experiences of enslaved individuals in Charleston and surrounding areas. The fund has supported numerous scholarly projects that have uncovered additional stories of resistance, survival, and tragedy within the slave-holding communities of the South Carolina Lowcountry. Each new discovery adds another layer to our understanding of how slavery functioned as a system and how individuals like Jacob navigated the impossible circumstances in which they found themselves. Modern forensic techniques continue to reveal new information about Jacob's final weeks. Recent analysis of wood samples from the chamber has provided more precise estimates of how long he survived in confinement, while chemical analysis of residue found within the space has offered insights into the physical conditions he endured. These scientific approaches complement traditional historical methods and help to create the most complete possible picture of his experience. The story has also inspired artistic works that attempt to give voice to Jacob's experience and to explore the broader themes of injustice and remembrance that his case represents. Local theatre groups have produced dramatic interpretations of his story, while musicians have composed songs that honor his memory and protest the conditions that led to his death. These artistic responses help to ensure that his story reaches audiences who might not otherwise encounter it through traditional historical channels. Educational institutions throughout the region have incorporated Jacob's story into their curricula as a means of teaching students about primary source analysis, historical interpretation, and the ongoing relevance of past events. Students studying his case learn to examine evidence critically, to consider multiple perspectives on historical events, and to understand how individual experiences reflect broader social and political systems. Many report that researching his story profoundly influences their understanding of American history and contemporary social issues. The documentation surrounding Jacob's death has also provided valuable insights into the daily lives and working conditions of enslaved individuals in urban environments. The detailed records kept by the Carter family and other Charleston households revealed patterns of labor organization, living arrangements, and social relationships that help historians understand how slavery functioned in cities as opposed to rural plantations. Jacob's skills as a carpenter and his apparent literacy suggest the complex ways in which enslaved individuals developed expertise and maintained cultural connections despite systematic oppression. Research into the broader context of Jacob's story has revealed that the Carter family's treatment of their enslaved workforce was not unusual for the period, despite its extreme cruelty. Similar cases of disappearances and unexplained deaths among enslaved individuals appear in records from other Charleston households, suggesting that violence and intimidation were routine tools used to maintain control. This context helps to explain how Jacob's fate could remain hidden for so long and why other members of the household were unwilling or unable to speak about what they may have witnessed. The psychological impact of Jacob's story extends beyond historical interest to contemporary discussions about trauma and memory. Mental health professionals have noted that learning about cases like his can trigger strong emotional responses in individuals whose families experience similar forms of historical trauma. Support resources have been developed to help people process these feelings and to channel them into constructive engagement with ongoing efforts to address systemic injustice. International scholars have also taken interest in Jacob's case as an example of how historical crimes can be investigated and documented decades or centuries after they occurred. His story has been cited in comparative studies of slavery, genocide, and other forms of systematic violence, providing insights into how societies remember or forget traumatic events, and how justice can be pursued even when traditional legal remedies are no longer available. The preservation techniques used to maintain the physical evidence of Jacob's ordeal have advanced significantly since the initial discoveries in the 1960s. Climate-controlled storage systems now protect the wooden artifacts and paper documents associated with his case, while digital archiving ensures that copies of all materials will remain available for future researchers even if originals deteriorate over time. These preservation efforts reflect a commitment to maintaining Jacob's story as a permanent part of the historical record. Community engagement with Jacob's story has evolved to include regular educational programs for all ages, from elementary school students learning about local history to senior citizens exploring their family connections to Charleston's past. These programs emphasize the importance of bearing witness to historical injustice, while also recognizing the resilience and humanity of individuals like Jacob, who faced unimaginable circumstances with dignity and hope. The annual February 15th memorial service has become an occasion not only for remembering Jacob, but also for reflecting on contemporary issues related to racial justice and human rights. Speakers often draw connections between the systemic violence that led to his death and ongoing struggles against discrimination and inequality. These connections help to demonstrate that historical study is not merely an academic exercise, but rather an essential component of efforts to create a more just society. As research into Jacob's story continues, new questions emerge about the experiences of other enslaved individuals who may have faced similar fates. Historians are now examining records from other Charleston households more carefully, looking for signs of unexplained disappearances or unusual construction projects that might indicate similar crimes. This broader investigation has already yielded evidence suggesting that Jacob's case may not have been unique, and that additional stories remain to be uncovered. The technological resources available for historical research continue to expand, offering new possibilities for investigating cases like Jacob's. Digital databases now allow researchers to cross-reference information from multiple sources more efficiently, while advanced imaging techniques can reveal text and markings that were previously illegible. These tools may eventually help to identify Jacob's origins more precisely, or to locate additional documentation related to his life and death. The legacy of Jacob's story extends far beyond the walls of the Carter Mansion, serving as a catalyst for broader conversations about historical memory and contemporary responsibility. In 1969, the final year of significant discoveries related to his case, the Charleston City Council passed a resolution formally acknowledging the injustices suffered by enslaved individuals within the city limits and committing to ongoing efforts to preserve and share these difficult histories. The resolution specifically mentioned Jacob by name, marking the first time that an enslaved individual had been officially recognized by Charleston's municipal government. The document acknowledged that his death represented not only a personal tragedy, but also a failure of the broader community to protect its most vulnerable members. This official recognition, while largely symbolic, represented an important step toward acknowledging institutional complicity in the violence that characterized the slavery system. Dr. Henley's research team completed their final report in 1970, concluding their comprehensive examination of the sealed chamber and its contents. Their findings confirmed that Jacob had survived in confinement for approximately 14 days, during which time he had maintained remarkable composure and systematic thinking. The evidence suggested that he had rationed whatever small amount of water might have been trapped in the chamber's construction and had organized his limited space to maximize comfort and maintain hope. The team's analysis of the wooden cross found among Jacob's possessions revealed intricate carving work that demonstrated both artistic skill and deep spiritual commitment. The cross bore tiny inscriptions that appeared to be biblical verses, suggesting that Jacob had memorized significant portions of Scripture despite the legal prohibitions against teaching enslaved individuals to read. This discovery provided additional evidence of the underground educational networks that existed within Charleston's enslaved community. Perhaps most significantly, the final investigation revealed that Jacob had managed to carve a small message into the chamber's back wall, hidden behind his body, and only discovered when the remains were carefully moved during the scientific examination. The message, laboriously scratched into the wood with what appeared to be a nail or small piece of metal, read simply, "I was here. I mattered. Remember." This final testament to Jacob's humanity and dignity provided a powerful conclusion to decades of research into his story. The message demonstrated that even in his final moments, facing certain death in conditions of unimaginable isolation and terror, he had maintained his sense of self-worth and his hope that someday someone would learn of his fate and bear witness to his existence. The discovery of this message prompted the Charleston Historical Preservation Society to establish a permanent memorial garden adjacent to the Carter Mansion. The garden, dedicated in 1971, features a simple granite marker bearing Jacob's carved message along with the dates of his birth and death. The surrounding plantings include species that would have been familiar to him during his lifetime, creating a living memorial that changes with the seasons while maintaining its essential character. Today, more than 180 years after Jacob's death, his story continues to resonate with new generations of visitors and researchers. The Carter Mansion receives thousands of visitors annually, many of whom report that learning about Jacob's experience fundamentally changes their understanding of American history and its ongoing impact on contemporary society. His story serves as a bridge between past and present, demonstrating how individual experiences of trauma and resilience can illuminate broader patterns of injustice and resistance. The archives containing documentation related to Jacob's case have become a destination for researchers from around the world studying slavery, memory, and historical preservation. His story has been translated into multiple languages and incorporated into international curricula addressing human rights and social justice. These global connections ensure that his memory transcends local boundaries and contributes to universal conversations about human dignity and historical responsibility. In the quiet moments between tours at the Carter Mansion, when the building settles into silence and afternoon light filters through the windows of the East Wing, visitors often report a sense of profound connection to the past and to the individual whose final weeks unfolded within those walls. The scratch marks remain visible on the wooden surfaces of the sealed chamber, testament to one young man's determination to survive and to be remembered. Jacob's story reminds us that behind every historical statistic lies an individual human being with hopes, fears, talents, and dreams. His careful calendar marks, his carved cross, his final message to the future, all speak to the fundamental human need to matter, to be seen, to be remembered. In preserving and sharing his story, we honor not only his memory, but also our collective responsibility to ensure that such injustices never occur again. The sound of fingernails on wood, once a source of torment for those who knew the truth, has become a call to memory, a reminder that some voices speak most clearly from the silence imposed upon them. In listening to those voices, in preserving those stories, and in bearing witness to those truths, we find not only the past, but also the path toward a more just future. Jacob's name is now inscribed alongside thousands of others on memorial walls throughout the South, but his story remains unique in its completeness, its documentation, and its power to connect us across the centuries to one individual's experience of suffering and hope. In the end, perhaps that is his greatest legacy, the reminder that every person matters, that every story deserves to be told, and that even from the darkest places, voices can still reach forward to touch the light.